So I've been seeing a lot of live techno acts recently that have been really inspiring. I've seen a lot of techno artists put their gear in the club and do live improvisation and collaboration and co-composition and electronic music jamming with other artists in the moment. And that's just been really nourishing and motivating, and I really wanted to get into this myself. And I was lucky enough to meet Eric, who goes under the name Surco. I met him last week at ADE, and it just so happens that Eric is really an authority. Like, he has his own YouTube channel and a school where he teaches basically this live electronic jamming. So I was lucky enough to be able to meet him, to be able to ask him some questions, and to be able to jump on a little call with him to start thinking out, okay, what's the mental model to start developing something like this? And I thought that this call would be interesting to you as well. So if you have any interest at all in live composed electronic music and specifically techno, remember to like the video and subscribe, and you might get something out of this conversation.
Hello there.
Testing, 1, 2. Yes.
It's the Bearded Bald Blackshirt Club.
The official dress code.
That's awesome.
Excellent.
How's it going?
Good.
Good to have a chance to talk. Like, we kind of met and rushed out the door. So it's nice to have a chance to chat about stuff.
It was crazy. What a night that was, that Saturday night. My God. And the store thing was just insane.
Crazy, right?
Yeah. What did you end up doing for the rest of the night?
Oh, I actually think I just called it after that. I think I went back. I went out and got something to eat with some friends, and then that was it. Because I had to play my show the next night, and I was still half jet lagged, and yeah, we ended up at Intercell, which was the one in the prison. Nice.
Yeah, that was pretty good. That was pretty good.
Yeah, I had gone to that venue on Thursday night. I went to see Colin Benders and Megan Lieber.
Yeah, you mentioned.
And Pariah, a few others. Colin's set was like, between his set and store, I just came back just like overflowing with inspiration. Just all these ideas, like, I want to try that, or what a great idea. Every time I hear Colin play, it's really funny. His stuff is so deceptively simple that it's like, you listen and you're like, damn, that's such a good idea to have huge impact with like nothing complicated, but it's just the right thing.
Yeah.
My name's Eric Turner. I'm from Colorado in the USA, from Denver. I perform and teach and do all that stuff under the name Surco, which I get asked all the time what it means. It means groove in Spanish. Nice. In case anyone's wondering. And yeah, I was a DJ for 25 plus years. Played all over, played at Ibiza, played in Europe, all over Europe, and the US, Canada, Mexico, all over the place. And I was always producing at the same time as well. And there came this moment about, I want to say like 5 or 6 years ago. It was like right before COVID, so like 5 years ago, that I was like, DJing's fun, but I've been doing it for a long time. Producing's fun, but I've been doing it for a long time. And it was kind of like losing the sparkle for me. Like I was looking for a kind of a new challenge and something fun. And I saw this interview with actually a Belgian guy, with Tom Hades.
Oh, wow,
and
Tom
he
Hades.
said, and he was talking about playing live, and he had this comment in it where he was talking about live performances being like a conversation between you and your machines, and you say something, and then they say something, and then you say something. It was really inspiring to me, and I liked the idea of combining DJing and producing, and I had a kind of a very specific idea going forward of what I wanted to do, which was to perform live in a way that was about as far away from DJing as it could be. And so the whole idea came up of doing kind of live production, basically.
Yeah.
So what I do is, when I get up to play, I'll do my sound check and everything with kind of whatever was in the machines from the last time I had them on. And then when sound check's done, I blank my sequencers, so that when I come up to perform, I'm kind of forced to start from scratch. And it always stresses me out right before I play. But then once I play, it's like you kind of get into it and you get like, oh yeah, I like this. And so the way that I play live is a bit different from how a lot of other people play live. There's a lot of people that are preparing tracks, or they're producers and they want to play those tracks out live. And that's a little bit of a different process. There's a lot of similarities, so I can talk to that as well. But it's a little bit of a different process than kind of building a rig that's designed to be very playable and very kind of immediate, so you can improvise a lot live. So yeah, so that's kind of how I got to where I am. And that's why, we met at the store event the other night, and that's why that event is so inspirational to me. I went to the one 2 years ago when I was at ADE, and I just felt like I was at school for 7 hours. Like it was exactly what I was trying to start to do. I was like, so this was 2 years ago. So I was like 2.5 years into my live performance thing. And then I saw this and I was like, yeah, like this is exactly what I'm going for, is what they're doing. That idea of just kind of letting the inspiration flow, let your machines do something cool that inspires you, and then you kind of take that and run with it.
Yeah.
And so yeah, that's kind of how I got to where I am today.
Amazing, man, amazing. Yeah, I feel like it's a bit destiny in some ways. Then that our paths crossed there at that store event, because for me it's kind of tickling that same urge, and also seeing like the DJ scene, and having DJ'd quite a bit for quite a few years, not so much recently, but for a long enough time. There's something about it that always felt very. Even from like an ideological point of view, almost like you manufacture an artifact as a producer, you then goes to a DJ, and DJ plays it out in a very kind of consumption kind of a setting, and there's very little like improvisation, or in ways of like conversation amongst artists, or happening in the room. And then seeing things like at Store, where it's really that like the dynamic that acoustic instrumentalists have, like when they are jamming together in a session, and they do that like active listening, where they're like, they don't know what the outcome is going to be yet, and then together you
like
shape
jazz,
that
kind of.
Exactly. That was when I tried to explain this to my brother, he was also like, yeah, it's like jazz. And I was like, yeah, I guess. And but like, why is it different? And then I came back to the thing of like, yeah, I think there's this collective assumption that we go back to a place that's very danceable. Like we can go away from that for a while, but we're going to come back to that, like knowing that it's going to be a very accessible dance groove at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And it's funny you were talking about what you were thinking of DJing as you were doing it, and it got to be similar to that for me. I found there was a frustration that I'd be performing as a DJ, and I would want to, like when you DJed for a long time, obviously you know this, you get a feel for the crowd and kind of what they need. And you're like, okay, I want to do this. And then you're like, okay, what track is that? Then you got to think about it. Then you find it. Then you get the right part. Then you do it. And there was a bit of a lag. And then there was a lag on the other side too, because you're producing tracks in a studio. You don't have any feedback from a crowd. You don't know what impact it's going to have until you take it to a show and test it. Then you're like, oh, that middle part was too long, or oh, I should have held on to this a little longer. Then you go back and then you re-edit it in the studio. So there's like this weird disconnect between actually making the music that's designed for a moment and the moment itself. Like the moment's not there when you're making it, and the making it's not there when you're in the moment, right?
That's so well expressed. Yeah.
I just love the improvised thing. I was always, inspired. Are you familiar with the Grateful Dead? Like old school
by name, but I'm not
band?
Properly. They're jam
was something
band.
that,
okay.
Yeah, and so there was a thing about them that was like, this was like way back years, like decades ago. People who were huge fans of them would record different shows that they did, and then they would trade cassettes and be like, oh, I was at this event on this date. Oh, I was at this one on this date. Let's trade.
Amazing.
And they were playing a certain style. They were even playing similar tracks, even they were playing their hits. But because they were a jam band, if you weren't there, you missed it. Like you kind of missed that iteration of what the song was. And I really got inspired by that as well from a techno standpoint. Like I want these to be, this is a moment that it can never be recreated again. So you had to be there.
Yeah.
And it's why I actually don't record a lot of my sets. That one that I sent you that I just posted on SoundCloud, it's rare that I do that, only because sometimes it doesn't translate. Sometimes you'll listen and go, oh, that sounds weird.
Yeah.
But in the moment, like, it was the perfect move, right? When you're listening to it out of context, you're like, that I would have never done that. Like, that's so bizarre.
Right.
But there, like, you had these three people in front of you that they totally reacted the way you wanted them to. And so it's kind of funny. There's always that kind of weird disconnect.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, when you're playing in a live context with like a large sound system, like next to you, like a large sound system will translate fairly simple things into the right dance energy that you need, and it'll sound great and engaging. But then when you sometimes listen to that recording from like the sober, sterile thing of your house, you might be like, you're comparing it to mastered, like fully mixed and mastered audio, where there's so much more like detail and nuance in it, and then it can feel a bit like rowdy or a bit like, I don't know, spiky, the things.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, live sound systems, I think it's something that, you know, it's funny, in like production courses like what you do, I think that's something that people don't talk enough about from like, as a longtime DJ, is the context in which the production's going to be heard.
Yeah.
Right? Like an artist might say, oh, I love Aphex Twin. Well, you know what? Most Aphex Twin tracks aren't listened to in a club. They're listened to on a great sound system in somebody's house. So there's a lot of detail. There's a lot of stereo panning. There's a lot of really cool stuff. Well, most major club sound systems are mono, because the person on the front by the left speaker needs to hear the same thing as the person on the left back by the bar. So they make them very mono. And so when you're producing dance tracks, like I find this all the time when I produce, is that I'm always trying to think, okay, the only time this is ever going to be heard in stereo is when the DJ is listening on Beatport deciding if they're going to buy it.
Yeah.
Then every time they play it, it's going to be heard in mono. It's like, how do I get the sound I want? And that, plus like the simplicity of things, and you know, a 909 sounds like crap in a recording, and then when you hear it on a big system, it's like, oh my God, where did that come from? You know, it's like, it's hard to translate sometimes.
It's amazing. My first interaction with this concept, or like with this format, aside from like seeing artists do live sets, I've seen artists do live sets, but this kind of like, let's go for hours and hours and just jam, like respond to each other. The first time I saw it was only a few weeks ago, at Rothad's concept. So in Berlin, in Berghain, there was this, also 5 artists on stage, and they're just live jamming all night, and also blew my mind. Also, of course, the sound system there is on a whole other level, but it's amazing. Did you ever manage to see that one?
So I didn't see his. If I'm not wrong, I think that's the first time they did it. I think that's the first time his label. I know it's his label group. Wizenweg, I can't remember.
I always call it Wizenweg, but I have no one who tells me the correct way to say it.
I don't know either. However, I will say, 2 years ago at the Amsterdam Dance event for Stoer, Rodhad was one of the performers of the group that I saw. It was Rodhad, Dasha Rush, Benny Rodriguez, and Surgeon with Speedy J, obviously. Like he's the commonality every time they play. But it was also very cool because, you know, everybody brings their style. So like every time you see it, it's different. Every configuration of artists, their mood, the mood of the crowd, what gear they brought, like everything impacts. And so it goes back to that thing, like you have to be there.
Yeah.
And if you're not there, you just kind of, you miss out. And like, you can watch the videos on YouTube and they're still pretty impressive, but it's still not the same vibe as like the techno Thunderdome in Paradiso with everybody like up the walls, like freaking out. So it's honestly cool. It's a totally different thing.
It's like the perfect environment. Like I couldn't imagine.
Totally agree.
I have like nothing to add to that. Like that's it for me. Oh, it's so good. Cool. Well, so also to bring it back to maybe one of the reasons I was excited to talk to you was that I'm looking to get into this myself. I'm looking to develop a way of playing a live set that's interesting and delivers good energy while still allowing a lot of creative freedom. And right now, the place that I'm at is I basically picked up my DJ practice again after a couple of years of not really nourishing that side of things. Started to DJ again, been setting up my DJ booth properly again and playing sets. And I was kind of thinking of, okay, what I'm going to do is next to my 2C DJs, set up some kind of sequence of groove boxes or modular. And just whenever I feel ready, just kind of low pass or high pass out some of the DJing stuff and then just take over with the live set and then go back to the DJ set like that and sort of start building up elements until I'm ready to do like a full hour of just composition, you know, because from straight out of the gate that feels intimidating in a way that I don't know how to maintain energy transitions and keep things moving in a full way, you know. So do you think that's a smart move, or do you say like, no, Oscar, just first commit to the live sets thing and then like just allow the downtime to get up to speed?
Yeah, I think it's really funny because this is like the same like dilemma that everybody goes through that's thinking about doing this. Like every student in my course has the same question. Like it's super common. There's like 5 questions that everybody asks, which is really funny. But so I'll give. There's not a direct answer. Like what everything really comes down to is your level of comfort. So for example, if you're a really good keyboard player, you're going to feel comfortable playing keys. I'm a horrible keyboard player, so I spend my time playing sequencers instead. But it's, you know, like you'll have your own preferences with that. I would say there's this thing that I talk about in my course. It's called the 50% rule, which is like you're going to be 50% dumber when you're in front of a crowd because you're stressed. There's lights flashing in your face. Plus, it's dark. It's hot. You know, something's not working right. There's anxiety. You've got the pressure of people in front of you. You know, you may have had a couple drinks before you got up there, like whatever. So like you're going to be 50% dumber. So the less complicated your setup can be, the better, because what you can do in a perfect sterile environment in your home studio is going to be very different from what you do live on stage, just because of all of those like external things that, you know, conspire to make you dumber, I guess, in the world. So for me, what I hear in what you just described is quite a bit of complexity, because changing formats from DJ to live, there's already a transitional, stressful complexity there. How do you clock? How do you beat match? Are you DJing with Ableton so you could clock together? Or if you're DJing with CDJs, there's not a really good clocking system between those yet. Hopefully somebody will make one. And so that's already one level of complexity. Then one of the reasons why I love the improvised side, like sometimes, well, a lot of people look at me and they say, wow, that must be really, you know, stressful to improvise. But for me, there's a lot of stress in pre-preparing tracks in a specific way, because the stress is, what if one thing in that preparation goes wrong? What if you have one bad MIDI cable? What if you have one sequencer that goes out of sync? What if you have one thing that doesn't start right, or it doesn't do a program change right, or it doesn't do something? Then you're freaking out and you're forced to improvise when you didn't expect it in front of a group of people.
Yeah.
Right. So for me, I always joke my sets are kind of pre-disaster. There's nothing set. So I just am like starting from a disaster at the beginning. and I find some comfort in that. But that's me personally. So it really comes back to your own comfort level and what where you feel the most confident. You know, some people try to find a balance between that, where there'll be certain things that are pre-prepared and then other things that are improvised. And kind of the degree that you do that and the gear you use for that, again, really comes kind of back to personal preference and what you want to do. But I guess the overarching thing is, I would say keep it as simple as possible, only because it's gonna be stressful. You know, like for example, if you look at my rig, it looks complicated, but I can tell you it's really simple.
Yeah.
Like it's, if you like each thing has its place. I have certain things that are like pieces of gear that I've selected or modules for my modular that are extremely performative. And they're things that, you know, I have modules in my big case that I use for sound design, which I could never use live because they make the coolest sounds, but it takes 20 minutes to get to that sound.
Yeah.
And nobody wants to watch me kind of screw around with things for 20 minutes while they're trying to have fun on the dance floor. So the modules I have are like instantly great sweet spots, you know, and so you don't have to stress about it, really. So it's about eliminating stress because it will be stressful. And if you can be less stressed, it's going to be way more fun for the crowd. You're going to have more fun, so they're going to have more fun. You know, they're going to feel it, feel the vibe.
Yeah, amazing. So, and then when I'm thinking about designing some kind of a setup, I guess in a way I'm almost thinking about like three voices almost. I tend to think about like low end groove, high end groove, and then a mid element that's like the focus, like the voice or whatever, like the motif.
Yeah,
you know,
the hook, the thing.
Yeah, in if you like are in the acid genre, it's a 303. You know, it's like the thing that's catching the attention in the middle. Would you say that's kind of a useful distinction to make in the live in your world, or is it too simple, or is it?
No, I think that's great. And I think specifically thinking of things in frequency bands is really important. So let me just ask really quick, are you planning on using a computer in your live setup, or you want to use all hardware?
I think ideally all hardware. I could use a computer.
So that does change things a little, which is good.
Yeah.
It's good to know that going in.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So if you're not going to use a computer, one thing that's really important to think about is you have way less control over kind of the signal processing. So you don't have EQ per channel, you don't have, you know, compressors per channel, you don't have parallel processing. So, which is not a bad thing. It's just a good thing to know going in. So I don't use a computer in my setup. I don't have any of that stuff. But the way you kind of, the way you fix it before it's a problem is if you think in frequency bands, like what you just said, it's really great because one of the things, and as a producer, and it's certainly as a production teacher, I'm sure you see this all the time, most processing, in my opinion, is necessitated because we created a problem ourselves, and then we have to fix it. So it's like, I totally clogged up my low end, so now I have to figure out how to sidechain everything out of the way, right? Like like we make the problem. So if you don't make the problem in the first place, you don't need all those things, right? My rig has no compressors at all on anything, because if you do the frequencies correct, you don't need them. Right. And if you level set correct, you don't need them. And if you saturate and do things correctly, you don't need compressors. You need them when you've created a problem that you have to fix. Right. So when you think in frequency bands, it's great because then if you say, okay, I'm always going to have one or two low end elements, I'm going to have one or two mid elements, one or two high elements, you can, you know, easily with filters and levels, you can keep them out of each other's way. So you don't have to have all of that other stuff, right? So thinking in that way is really, really good. Also, something you were talking about, three voices and keeping it simple. That's another great thing. I talk about that a lot of my courses, that we tend to want, just like in production, we tend to want to add things and kind of clutter it up. And that's, again, when we create problems that we have to fix. So I kind of have this kind of unwritten rule for myself, because I have a lot of options when I play, that I try not to have more than 3 elements besides drums. I try not to have more than 3 elements going at the same time, because then they step on top of each other. So, you know, if you think about it, like in production, like I've watched a ton of your videos, and like when you're doing something like, you know, melodic techno production, you're gonna have melodies and counter melodies and bass lines, and then a sub, and then you're gonna have all these tonal things that are impossible to manage in a live setting. Like you just can't have 3 different melodies playing off of each other. It's like the processing nightmare that creates is crazy. So yeah, keeping it simple and thinking of it in frequency bands is kind of a good way to have a clean mix from the start, so you don't have to mix and master at the end. You don't have
Yeah.
to clean up a mix at the end.
Yeah. I feel like even more drastically, like, yeah, the melodic direction I would never go once modular synthesizers are involved, because trying to do anything that involves a chord progression is just like straight out the window, I find. Like,
Yeah.
it's so
Yeah.
not made for that yeah.
So there is a like a little trick to get around that that I love to tell people about. So in my setup, I don't have any polyphonic synthesizers, including voices in my modular. Everything's monophonic, because for me it's a lot easier to control. But if you want to do chord progressions, let's say you've got a triad of a chord that you want to represent in your performance, you can do the 3 notes on 3 separate instruments. And it keeps them separate in the mix. So you can still have chord movement, but it's not, a Juno 106 pad taking up
Gotcha.
all the sonic spectrum that you've got to fix afterwards, right? Like you can do it, but you just have to be more purposeful about, okay, this kind of low mid bass sound is going to be the root. Then I'm going to do this kind of mid range. It's going to be the middle part of the triad. Then I'm going to do something in the higher end, and you can have those play together, or you can move one off the note to do a key change. And so you can still do it, but thinking ahead, if that's something you want to do, setting things up so you have enough control to actually do it.
Interesting. Yeah. Cool. I think it initially I wouldn't put myself into that. Like that sounds like an intermediate.
I don't either.
Yeah, that sounds like an intermediate level
nightmare.
challenge that maybe at some point in the future I'd be willing to tackle. But at this point, I'm very happy with like self-repetitive monophonic sequences in the mids. That I think that's plenty, really. But yeah, okay, amazing. And so, like, you say, for example, drums plus 3 elements. Could I ask what would be a typical 3 elements that might be playing at the same time for you?
Wow, because it can kind of go all over the place.
Yeah, I
I mean,
guess.
like you were listening to that mix, so it kind of goes all over
Yeah,
the place.
yeah.
But it really depends. I mean, when I say 3 elements, it's like 3 tonal elements, because
Yeah.
tonal elements, again, they can take up a lot of space, they can clash, they can throw other things off. So my stuff tends to be more like tonal percussion than kind of melody lines, but that's just kind of my style. It's what I like more. But yeah, so those 3 elements, it might be a bass synth, and it might be some sort of a mid-range kind of plucky sound, and it might be a higher end kind of a wash sound of like a kind of a reverby opened something. So they've each got their space, but it makes the track sound a bit more full. And again, I can show a little bit too, like of how, like what things I use for that, because again, my rig is kind of purpose built for the way I want to play.
Yeah.
And so there's things that lend themselves really easily to that, where others, it's hard if you just like, these are my 3 favorite synths, I want to try to make them work. It's like sometimes that just doesn't work out the best way.
Yeah. Are you pre-listening while doing things, or do you kind of compose out loud?
Yeah, it's funny. So when I very first started, one of the first pieces of gear I bought was the mixer that's in my modular. It's the WMD performance mixer.
Gotcha.
And it has a cue in it. And I bought it for that, because like coming at it from a DJ perspective, I was like, well, I'm going to be able to listen so that I can write something, and then I want to fade it in, or I want to bring it in, whatever. And all it took me was one performance of doing it like that, and I realized that was not how I wanted to do it. Because as soon as I would put on the headphones, I would detach from what was going on with the music and the crowd. And when you're DJing, you can do that, because the song will change on its own. Like the producer created breaks and buildups and things, then interest and LFO changes to whatever. So you're not doing that. So you can put on the headphones and detach for 20 or 30 seconds to do something. When you're playing live, you're doing all that stuff. And so as soon as you detach, like you forget where you are, you forget that, that same thing has been going for a minute and a half and it should have been out, 30 seconds ago.
Yeah.
So I stopped doing it, but I did originally
Interesting.
start doing it. It sounded like a great idea to me, and then in practice, it just didn't work for me personally. But I do have a lot of friends that they do perform that way.
Yeah.
So like my friend Travarsi, when she plays, she
Ah,
has
yeah.
in-ears, and she'll
Travarsi.
put them in and take them out.
Yeah.
So she'll put them in to write something, and then she'll pop them out to be there.
Cool.
And her stuff evolves. She has a lot of modulation in her case. So a lot of things are modulating on their own.
Yeah.
So she can do that, right? My case is way smaller.
Yeah.
And I don't have a lot of that modulation happening on its own because I prefer to kind of modulate with my hands. And so I can't detach like that.
Interesting.
So again, it comes back to personal preference
Yeah.
and what gear you choose and all that stuff.
It's interesting that you mentioned Travarsi. I met her at at ADE as well. That was super nice to meet her, and I saw her do her workshop. I have so many thoughts about what she does. It's super interesting. Like also using the laptop as a guitar pedal effectively, like using Reason as a delay pedal. And yeah, she also uses the WMD mixer, right? I remember noting it at the time. But then there's also do you know Karen, which is like Paria and Blawan?
Yeah, of course.
So I think for them actually it was like what, I don't remember if it was an interview or where I saw it, but they don't pre-listen. They're just like bring in the sound and let the chips fall where they may, and we'll steer it from there to where it needs to be, like pretty quickly.
Yeah, and if you're gonna do it that way, what I've done to kind of help with that is you kind of build guardrails into your into your setup, into your gear, so that you don't know exactly how it's going to sound, but you know it's not going to sound awful. Like you eliminate the awful possibility. So there's a couple ways that I do that. One is I kind of so with selecting certain sounds, selecting certain instruments, whether it's a module or a hardware box, or a sampler you're using, a one shot or something like that. Selecting sounds that you know already kind of fit the mood of what you're doing.
Yeah.
Takes care of part of it. The kind of the range of sounds that a certain thing makes kind of fits generically into what you're doing, so at least that'll be okay.
Yeah.
And then the other part is the sequencer that I use. It's the Oxy One. That one. There's a couple things that it does that are really important as well to the way that I play. One is that you can quantize to key, so that anything that you're doing, whether you're doing it on your own or whether you're generating random sequences, it does them in the key that you've selected.
Yeah.
You can make the key of one sequencer within it follow other sequencers. So if you change key, the others will change key as well, which is really handy. And then for me, the real important key to that is, as far as the way that I perform, is that you have the option to randomize kind of like a whole melody, if you will. So like gate and pitch.
Yeah.
Or you can just randomize the pitch by itself without changing the gate pattern. So what I like to do is I like to write gates, so I get that much control over kind of like, I know where the rhythm is. Like I'm listening to what's playing. I want to fit things in between beats so I can put those into the sequencer live so I know where they're going to fit. Then I can use the randomization to randomly generate pitch in key on those gates that I created.
Yeah.
And I do that live. I'll just chuck it in.
Love it.
I have no idea what it's going to sound like, but I know it'll be in key.
Yeah.
I know the rhythm will be something that I'm pretty good with, and I know the sound that it's going to trigger is something that I've selected before the show as kind of the sound palette that I know will fit with kind of what I want to do.
Yeah.
Like there's certain modules I just would never use, or certain pieces of hardware that I wouldn't use because they don't fit the kind of sonic palette of what I'm playing.
Yeah.
So that would be something else I would have to worry about.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. That's amazing. I love that you're that randomization is part of the workflow, because I feel like
totally.
Yeah,
It's key.
feel like picking up Reason again recently for first time in a while. I find myself just the randomization tools, just being able to randomize the sequencer is just like I'm just having a good time. Just like, yeah, it's
Just
so,
idea generators.
yeah,
You
yeah.
know, it's like, it's great to, and that's where I kind of look at it is I'll use the randomization to generate something. And that goes back to that Tom Hayes quote, like the conversation between you and the machines. I want the machine to say something. And
Yeah.
that's the randomization. That's the thing I wouldn't have done in that moment on my own.
Yeah.
And then I want to respond to that, which is how I then modify that sequence or synthesizer or whatever. And then it kind of goes back and forth. Then I'll say, okay, now I want a new something from the machine. And
Yeah.
then it just kind of goes back and forth the whole time.
Makes perfect sense. Love that. Wow, cool. Okay, so also the Oxy one you mentioned, also Traversi, using that one. No, oh no, not actually Traversi, but the person with
Alex.
Alex. Yeah, Alex 106.
Alex, so it's really funny. If you go on the Oxy One Instagram, there's a picture from NobCon a few weeks ago
Yeah.
of me and Alex sitting together in the lobby of the hotel, and I'm showing him the Oxy One because he's from here in Denver. We know each other
Right.
here. We're both in the same city, and so he's like, "Man, I got to try it out. I see all you guys using it. I want to try it." And so we sat down in the lobby, and I showed it to him, and he's like, yeah, I like this a lot. So then, you know, all of a sudden he started to use it. It's such a great, there's really 3 sequencers out there that I think really lend themselves to hardware live performance. The Oxy One, the Torso T1, and the Hapax. Those are the 3 that kind of everybody tends to circle around before they choose one. And,
Interesting.
you know, for a bunch of different reasons, I settled on the Oxy One. Like that's my kind of go-to after having tried the others. But each one has kind of their own strengths and weaknesses. They're, you know, good for different things. But for my setup, the Oxy One's really the
Wonderful,
one.
wonderful. So if I have to draw a little mind map for myself, like what problems do I need to solve? I need to solve ways of generating interesting drum grooves, and then ways of generating interesting synth bits in between it, more or less.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, I would put it into a couple categories. I would say you've got you have sounds in general, like the sound palette. You know, kind of like when I'm preparing for a show, I will, you know, I've used the Digitac too, so I'll put in certain one shots that I know I'm going to use, but I don't have patterns with them. I just know that sound is going to go with kind of the sound palette that I want to use.
Yeah.
When I'm selecting modules for my modular, I'm selecting based on what what modules generate the sounds that fit with my kind of desired sound palette. So for me, that's kind of like the, you know, before an artist paints, they're going to put their paints on the palette and they'll say, okay, this is what I'm going to use.
Yeah.
Like I'm not going to use every color. I'm going to use these ones, and then they can start doing their art from there.
Yeah.
So I think sound is kind of one thing. Within the sounds, but as kind of a side thing, I would say workflow, meaning do you want to use more synth-based workflow or more sample-based workflow? Or, you know, and most people are going to use a combination, but like how much of which do you want to use? Do you want to use sample loops? Do you want to use one-shots? Do you want to use synths with presets? Do you want to use synths that are kind of more hands-on because you like the, you know, again, this goes back to your skill set. If you're really comfortable with synthesizers, then synth workflow might be your thing. If you're really good with samples and sample chopping and sample mangling, that might be your thing. Like it's all going to end up being your sound in the end. But those things I think are kind of the big ones. And then after that, the other kind of missing piece is control. Over those things, over the sounds and the workflow, because as I said, I play my sequencer. Like I'm very inspired by Jeff Mills as like he's the king of playing the sequencer.
Yeah.
Like when you watch him play a 909, he's playing it like an instrument. So I like to play sequencers because I'm a horrible keyboard player. Somebody who's a great keyboard player may want that as part of their control mechanism because they feel really comfortable with that. So they want to be able to, let's say, you know, pluck out a melody really quick on a keyboard and have a looper that's capturing that so then they can move on to another thing. That's not my workflow, but it is for a lot of people because it's really their comfort zone. Like that's where they go to. So really sound palette, workflow, synth versus sample based, and then whatever your kind of control structure is, because that will drive your decision making on what gear to use, on how to connect it, on how to structure the music that you make. Like all of that stuff kind of comes back down to those things.
Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You see, because I've got quite a bit of, you know, elements here, like a lot of gear that could potentially feature inside of some kind of a workflow, but I've never gotten to the minimum viable product yet, you know. And like
Right.
one of the tools that I've been trying to use is the Electron Analog Rhythm. Like, it's amazing, you know.
My favorite drum machine of all time.
Yeah, it's spectacular. But every time that I use it, I
have,
need to go.
you can see right there,
yeah.
I have a Mark II, and right there I have a Mark I.
Nice.
It's like my favorite drum machine bar none of all time.
But that's very good. That's good. That's good to hear. Glad that I have it then.
Yeah.
I mean, the problem is that every time that I use it, I need to go into the manual. I need to try and find the manual, and or even like watch tutorials on like, okay, but how am I saving a kit as a this, and like what is a sound again in this thing? Like, what do they mean?
Yeah.
And then I have to like draw all the diagrams, and then I lose them, and then 2 weeks later I come back and I'm like, oh no, I'm Googling again what a sound means in this thing. Like, you know, like stuff like this. So
do you have any other Electron boxes?
no,
or just
it's the
Analog
first
Rhythm?
one.
Okay. It's funny because so Electron, they for years have had this reputation of being really complicated, and it's because their original machines, so like the machine drum, the mono machine, and the Octatrack, were ridiculously complicated to use. Then they went to like the Rhythm and the Analog 4, which were less complicated, but still had their things. Like you said, like you forget, you got to go get the manual all the time. And then this kind of new iteration of the digiboxes, so like the Digitact and the Digitone and the, you know, Syntact and those ones, it's a very similar yet totally different workflow. Like, it's really, really immediate.
Okay.
And very obvious.
Yeah.
So the reason I love the Analog Rhythm is because of its depth, because of what it can do. Like, I love it as a sound design machine. I love being able to layer samples and synthesis and create amazing sounds with that. But what I generally would always do for performance, as much as I love playing on the Rhythm, it's just too big to take, and I have to get everything into carry-on luggage and stuff, so like keep it small. So what I would do is I would make sounds on the Rhythm and resample them as a whole sound using sample and synth, and then I'd load them in the Digitact.
Right.
Because it's such an easier workflow and a way smaller machine, and that way I would get the same sounds. For years, like, my kicks all came from the Analog Rhythm. They were all made in there. So I would take like 909 sample, and then I would layer the analog drum synth over the top, and I would kind of make that into something, resample that, and then layer another synth, resample that, and come up with like exactly what I wanted, and then just sample that one shot into the Digitact. Like this 1 second of time that took me, you know, hours to make. But now my kick is actually coming from a module in my modular case, because I found this module that, for me, it's the best sounding kick I've ever heard, and it's nothing but sweet spots, and it's super controllable. And so that performance of mine that you listen to, that's one kick the entire time, but it's so controllable, you can make it into anything you want.
And I have a hypothesis of what I think it is now, but what
do you think it is?
Is it a Jomox?
No.
Oh, no.
It's not. It's funny. That used to be the go-to.
Yeah.
There was the Jomox and the Kicane were the two that kind of everybody went to.
Yeah.
But no, it's actually your fellow countryman. It's a Belgian. It's a Schachmann.
Right.
It's the battering ram from Schachmann.
My God.
Which I had heard about it, and I had seen a couple videos. I saw like Blush Response did a video on it and stuff, and I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. It sounds great. When I went to Superbooth this year, it was one of my things on my list. Like, I have to try this firsthand to see if I like it. I went to their booth and was blown away by this kick drum.
Hell yeah.
And then the reinforcement, like, I was like, I gotta have this. This is gonna be my new kick drum. Then the reinforcement for me was, while I was there for Superbooth, I went to the event at Berghain that Dasha Rush did with Colin Benders and a few others. It was an all live performance. And I was there with Alex, actually, from the we were talking about, and we were commenting on how amazing Colin Bender's kick sounded. I was like, I wonder what, I couldn't see what he was using. And
Yeah.
obviously in his setup, you can't see anything because it's just like so huge. And I didn't know what he was using. And the next day, I was talking to the Shockma guys about having been at the show, and they were like, oh yeah, he came yesterday. We gave him one of the battering ram kick drums, and then he just came back a little while ago and said that was all he used last night for the show. And we had been commenting on how great it sounded. And so I was like, well, okay, I wanted this already.
Yeah.
And now I'm like, okay, that confirms it. Like that. And I messaged him about it, and he actually said that it was the first time since he started doing modular that he didn't feel like he needed to layer sounds to get the kick he wanted. He was always having to layer things. And I feel the same way. This kick module is bonkers. Like,
That's
it's
wild.
so good. Yeah.
This obligatory mention that this video is not sponsored by Shackmat in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, of course. Or Jomox or Oxy or anything.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
it's funny, you get like anytime I'm talking with gear nerds, we're all like, oh, did you try this? Have you tried this?
Yeah,
Have you done this?
yeah,
And it's
yeah.
like,
Yeah, of course,
like name
of course,
after
you can
name.
imagine after this conversation, I'm like going out to all the shops looking like, what does this cost? What does this cost? How can I justify? Can I justify getting this if I'm not sure? Blah blah blah. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, well, okay.
It
that's,
just comes down
yeah.
to, you have to find the gear that gels with you and that you can really get out of it what you want in a really immediate way. Because like I said at the beginning, like, it's going to be an uncomfortably dumb environment when you're there on
Yeah.
stage. So like, you have to be able to just reach for something and know that it's going to sound the way you want it to. Because if you have to kind of like, my problem with some of the other kick modules, and the reason why I had never done a kick in my case and I had always used samples, was because I could never really dial them into that sweet spot that was exactly what I wanted
Yeah.
in a short enough amount of time.
Yeah.
So then your performance feels like you're learning how to use your gear in front of the crowd, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
They get bored of that really quick. And that was the thing with this module, is that for me, it's just like nothing but sweet spots. So I can just like randomly twist a knob and it's going to sound good wherever
Yeah.
it lands.
Yeah.
And that for me, with every module that I use, is really important, that it doesn't, it's they're easy to control and they're kind of predictable with what you're going to be able to do with them.
100%. 100%. I think this conversation is just making it clear to me now that like I have so many options in front of me, but I'm not in a position to just try something out for half an hour and like do a live set for half an hour and then notice what works, what doesn't work, and then iterate from there. Like
You might be though.
probably.
You might be though. I
Yeah.
think you have a fair amount of gear. I'm
Yeah,
assuming,
yeah. It's a mental
as we
thing
all
at this
do.
point. Yeah.
So what I would say is that you need something that can do drums.
Uh-huh.
So if you have a particular drum machine or the analog rhythm or something like that, and kind of set it up with sounds that are kind of foundational drums, just so that you can have something that can keep a beat and do an open hat and those things. And then, a synth or two or three, or I don't know if you have modular gear as well, but have,
I
a
do.
few things like that are voices, and then
Yeah.
something that's kind of sample based, whether it's one shots or longer loop samples. And those are kind of the main building blocks. And it doesn't have to be any one particular piece of gear. As long as you have something that can do drums, something that can do kind of percussive things, something that can do melodic-y things,
Yeah,
and something
yeah.
that can do kind of atmospheric things for the kind of techno that I think we both like. That's really what it takes. And if you like, I can show you on my setup like what I'm using for each of those things and how kind of simple it is.
Yeah, I guess I would like that, because looking over at my modular right now, what I'm looking at is, with very high potential, is obviously is a DFAM into a magneto delay. So like I think that's the DFAM can do a lot of
DFAM's a
percussive.
techno machine.
Yeah, exactly. It can be percussive or tonal or whatever.
Yeah.
So that's cool. I can send that also into a plonk if I want to, which can get different drum timbres again. But then I don't think I have anything that can do samples or atmospheres, and that might.
And do you have any hardware boxes? I mean, you have the analog rhythm, so that can do one-shot samples pretty well. It doesn't do time stretch samples, but it can do one-shots pretty well.
No, that's all I got.
Okay.
I mean,
Well, let me just show you really quick. I will switch. So basically, one sequencer that's kind of controlling more or less everything. The Digitact I have, it's the Digitact 2, so it has 16 tracks. The 1 through 8 are all basically one shots. We'll go back to that. I'll explain it first, and then I'll see what my sound issues are. So 1 through 8 are basically kind of drum percussive one shots, and for every kit that I make, you were talking about drum kits. So when we were talking about sound palette, I always try to keep like things in the same position. So like one's always kind of like a kick or a kick, whether it's a sequence rumble or something that has to do with kick. 2 is always clap or snare. 3 and 4 are kind of percussion, like, you know, wood blocks or individual hits. 5 is closed hat, 6 is open hat, 7 is ride, and 8 is tom. So even if I switch to a different kit, it will be a different clap, different closed hat, different open hat, different tom, but they'll still be in the same place.
Yeah.
So I can always kind of go, like, I don't have to think about, okay, what kit am I on? Where is that thing in this kit? So again, simplify it as much as you can. Then 9 through 16 are melodic one-shot samples that I sequence from the Oxy One, because again, I can sequence quantize to key and things like that from here, but I'm sequencing them over MIDI. And the way, again, going back to talking about the sound bands, kind of like frequency bands, I tend to go depending on the kit, it's either the type of instrument or I go from lowest frequency to highest frequency. So if I'm performing, I know everything in there fits the palette, and I'm thinking to myself from listening to what I'm playing, I need something in the high mids. Well, I know that's going to be like 13 or 14 or 12. It's going to be somewhere in here. So that way I don't have to think too much about the individual instrument that I'm bringing in. It's just more, I need something in this frequency band.
Yeah.
Like a lot of times when I'm producing, I'll use a, the Spectrum plugin in Ableton.
Sure.
So I'll have that, and I'll look and see if there's a notch somewhere. I'll just look for something that fits that notch to try and keep things even. So I do that a lot the same when I'm performing live. So I'll bring in something that will fit a piece of the spectrum in a certain way.
And so the Digitact is kind of triggered as a sample player, but it's actually sequenced by the Oxy. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so 1 through 8 are sequenced internally. Just because they're drums, it's really easy to do one shots in there. But then anything that's melodic, so in 9 through 16, those are all on individual tracks in the Oxy.
Amazing.
So that way I can use it in its best way for each of the best things.
Because I think the analog rhythm can do something similar. I think if I dedicate a few of the pads to a sample, I can get quite a lot of out of that. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I mean, anything that's a one shot you can do on the rhythm. And what's cool there is you can combine it with synthesis too, and it still can be a one shot. And you can sequence it either internally or from an external sequencer like the Oxy One. So whatever, they're pretty flexible that way.
And the Oxy One just has a MIDI cable out going into the Digitact.
Yeah, so the Oxy One, again, this goes back to like the power of this thing. It has a ton of connectivity. So you've got, I have this cable, which is actually an HDMI cable that's going to this module, which is called the pipe. And so this has 8 CV and 8 gate outputs, which are actually, you can see them on the back here. It has the physical outputs. Or if you use the pipe, this is my 8 CV and my 8 gates, so I can leave my case patched when I travel. And then when I show up at a gig, I just connect the HDMI cable, and it's all 8 CV and all 8 gates connected already.
That's
so I don't have to
cool.
repatch for my sequencer all the time.
Gotcha.
So it has that. And then the MIDI out part of this, so you can do just a regular MIDI cable out, which is what I have because it's a relatively simple setup. So I have it going into the Digitact and then through to the black box for clock. So it's really easy. However, if you wanted to sequence multiple MIDI instruments with it, the Oxy actually has 48 channels of outgoing MIDI. So it has 1 through 16A, 1 through 16B, 1 through 16C, and then there's this little thing called a split. So you can split those to different devices. So with the 4 sequencers, each one of them can be, if you choose to have them, be an 8-track multi-track. So you can have 32 tracks of sequencing going out on 48 channels of MIDI, because this also has mod lanes and stuff like that. So the MIDI capability is really huge, but also the CV gate. And that's why for me, it was really important to find a sequencer that was really flexible.
Yeah.
because I do change up my setup from time to time. So
Yeah. Whoa.
so then in my modular case, I have two voices that are pretty flexible, generally really great for basses, but can also be leads. So the Ericsson's bass line and the Bastel Pizza. But I like them both because they have a lot of kind of sonic flexibility in what they can do with the within a performance. So
Yeah.
like with the with the Bastel, the tune knob at the top can be set to be an octave switch once you have it tuned the way you want. So then if I'm playing it as a bass line for one part of the show and then I want it to be a lead, I can just change octaves.
That's fun.
And I think it has a 6-octave range. So then all of a sudden you're in this whole other range. It's FM, so it's like sounds super weird. And so I love that. And then I use the BIA from Noise Engineering, which is another great kind of tonal percussive. And then the kick module. And then this one's supposed to be a hi-hat, but I don't use it for hi-hats at all. I use it also for tonal percussion because it has a lot of different engines in it. And it's really hands-on.
Which one's that?
Filter. It's the Archer's rig from Shockmont.
Yeah.
Also, you can see they look almost the same, but
Yeah, sure.
one's a kick and one's a hat. But this one's cool because it has like FM engine, pure sine wave. It has noise engines and things. And then you have decay and filter and different effects built in, plus a tuner, which you can sequence so you can do melodic stuff with it.
Whoa.
And so it's, again, very hands-on to do like kind of improvised things with.
Yeah.
And then the last piece within the case that's important for my setup is the way I set up the sends. I have one send that goes to a frequency shifter. So I can send any combination of sounds from any of the voices to a frequency shifter and then shift frequency and filter it, and it comes back into its own channel like a voice.
Right.
So I can make voices from the other voices that kind of are adjacent to what I'm playing.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, it's based off of the sound, but it doesn't quite sound the same. So you can layer it with the original, or because I have the send pre-fader, you can have none of the original and just have sound waves going to it that combine to make another sound. So it gives a lot of flexibility. And then the last send is this one, which is the Endorphins Ghost, which is, delay, reverb, filter, distortion, like everything in one module. And I have this kind of way that I like to set it up so that when I send things through it, it kind of turns into a wash. Yeah. And then you can sweep the filter as kind of like a resonant bandpass and pick up different frequencies of what's going through it. And then you leave it and it makes it sound like another voice came in. Amazing. Even though it's not a voice.
And that's the big, knob, like is in the Ford.
Yeah, that's the filter sweep is the larger knob here.
Because
then everything goes through this one, which is the Oxy Meta. And this is kind of like, this is basically like the effects on a Pioneer DJ mixer.
Oh, whoa.
So you've got like high pass, low pass filter, you've got risers, reverb, delay, echo, looper. The looper's kind of like, it's not really a traditional looper. It's more like a beat repeat almost, and it's clocked so you can change the time division. So this is great for like build-ups and breakdowns and kind of like transitional things that you would want in a live performance.
Absolutely. Right? Gorgeous.
And then the last thing is the black box, and this is just playing loops. So it's playing long time stretched samples and controlled here from the launch control, just so I have control over volume and high pass, low pass filter for each channel. And this is like subs or atmospheres or things like that. Or, let's say I sampled something in the studio that I really liked, I can chuck it in here and I can use that as an element in performance as well.
So it's like just an advanced sample player really, and it creates these ambiances and
Yeah, and I just use it in a kind of the same way you would use like the clip view in Ableton.
Yeah. That's
the view I'm using. So I'm not using the sequencer or sequencing it or one shots or anything. I'm just clocking it. And then I can just hit a loop and it will just continue to loop. And then I can bring that loop in. So like, let's see here.
Oh yeah, we still didn't get the sound working. Like I'm not hearing it.
Let's see here. There we go.
Yeah,
got it. Getting that?
Getting that.
All right, cool. Yeah, so like, for example, if I just wanted an atmosphere, I could just bring in something like that. So it gives me something kind of textural.
Yeah.
And I can just kind of let that play. And then again, kick drum can be anything from like crazy whatever to like really super subtle. So
Yeah.
and you can dial it in really easily to find what you're looking for. And then you might have something like from here, I've got some kind of like percussive stuff. Again, this is what's left over from that show. So you might hear something similar because I haven't done anything since I got back. So that's coming from this Archer's rig. So like if you change.
Yeah.
And then you can change engines. So again, a lot of possibilities sonically from that. Gotcha. I also have some subs in here, which I like as well. So like I can bring in.
Oh, nice.
So it just can give it kind of an underlying groove. And those are all like loops that are coming from the black box. Then over here, like I said, I have foundational drums. So like if I want to bring in, so I've got closed hat, open hat, and ride. So if I decide, okay, this track needs a ride, I can bring in.
Yeah.
Do I not have it here? Oh, I know why. Because I have everything muted. Yeah.
Hell
right.
Yeah.
So I've got like, again, foundational elements that I know I'm gonna always use. That's what I kind of keep in my drum stuff. So if I didn't want to ride, I have an open hat. So I can keep an open hat, or I've got a basic closed hat.
Yeah.
So those things that I always go back to, that's kind of what I keep here just to keep it really simple. And then a lot of the improvisational stuff is coming from here.
Gotcha.
So like, let's say I was to like, let's just zero this out. So this, the Ergasynth's bass line.
Yep.
So again, this sequencer that it's on is kind of like a piano roll style. So this is one voice, and it's like note and gate, and I have it looping on 8 steps, but you can change the end point, loop it however you want.
Sure.
So like if you just bring in, so you can just bring in like a single note, or if you want, like what's great about this is you can kind of like improvise and draw stuff.
Yeah.
And
Gotcha.
again, it's set to a key, so this is set to Phrygian E.
Yeah.
So everything is going to be in that key. And then you can go in and just start doing sound design.
That's fun.
And start to play around with stuff, but you're just kind of making it on the fly. And let's say I come up with a rhythm that I like that. I can go into the randomization thing to where it just randomizes pitch. And every time I hit this, it'll keep the same gate pattern, but it'll change pitch.
Yeah, I love it.
And I can do it. And you can set parameters of range, so you can make the range really small,
Yeah.
or you can make it really big.
Nice.
So you can hear there's kind of like, so it's just basically like building block elements. So there's a simple sub and a simple atmosphere, one hi-hat, one bass line or melodic line, whatever you want to call it, a kick drum, and then this percussive stuff.
Yes.
So it's like, it's really, really simple to kind of build things and put things together. So really everything's designed like that. One thing to show you just really quick too, just because it's so interesting. So let's take this sound from the bass, and if I send that through the Koslin,
Sure.
like I'll take it out. This is what it sounded like. I'll take it out and I'll send it to the Koslin pre-fader, and then I'll start to bring that in.
Is it normal I'm not hearing it?
Yeah, let me see. I don't know
Okay,
why.
just checking.
Oh, that's why, because I changed it to post fader for some reason. So you notice I didn't move this up at all, right? So that's still completely out.
Yeah.
This is that's what's coming through the Koslin. So then I can start to shift frequency. And then I have filter control over that as well.
How did you, what just happened when you made it so computery sounding? So like...
I added in a modulation from the Pam's workout that's going to an FM input on this.
Gotcha.
So again, that's just the sound coming from there. So then if I wanted, I can layer those.
Yeah, cool.
Or I can take it out completely and just use this. And then I can send, make sure I don't have anything else going there. I can send that through the Endorphins Ghost as well.
Ah, cool.
So that if I take this out and I have this pre-fader, this is just the wash.
Yeah, nice.
That's coming from that sound going through that into this. So it just gives basically just a lot of opportunities to do kind of random stuff. And then when you're kind of cruising along, then you've got the performance effects, like what I was saying. So if you wanted to filter.
Right.
Right, so you have the ability to change things up here.
Yeah, that's huge.
Right, so again, just a lot of flexibility to kind of experiment, but with a certain amount of guardrails so you know more or less what's gonna come out.
Yeah.
So again, like having something weird like the Coslin that's a frequency shifter, it's gonna go super weird, but you know it's gonna be in key because it's coming from something that's set to key.
Yeah.
So it's gonna go with what you're playing, but still be weard.
Yeah.
So like, you see what I mean? It kind of gives you a lot of flexibility of stuff.
No, this is amazing. Yeah, this is super cool. Wow.
So
thanks for it's good to see your face again.
Yeah,
thanks
exactly. Here I am again.
Thanks
Still
for
me.
Yeah, still you indeed. Thanks for walking us through that. That's incredible.
Yeah, no problem.
That's amazing. That gave me a lot of insight into how you tackle the different challenges that come with this. And indeed, the gear seems to be a great sort of playground to express yourself, but with very reliable elements, so you can always come back to like sanity when you need to, and then go into weirdness when you need to.
And I think the big key too, when you're talking about gear, is that I think in this day and age, there's too many people out there that say, oh, you have to get this, you have to get this, this is the best, this is the worst. And it's like, there isn't any of that in this. It's really find elements that you gel with workflow wise, because you're gonna be the one under pressure in front of people. Doesn't matter what anybody else says is the best piece of gear, the worst piece of gear, whatever. You know, you look at somebody like you mentioned Blawan, like when he plays, he's using a looper and one voice in a modular, and he sends it to a looper, saves that voice, then does another one and saves it on the other track, then another one. And it's like, it's a totally different workflow because that works for him.
Yeah.
And that's amazing. And then there's other people that are all sample based, and they want to pre-prepare pieces in the studio and use them as building blocks to perform live. That's cool. Like whatever you want to do. Yeah, and there's no one way to do it. You'll find your way. Like you'll find whatever is your best combination of gear to accomplish the things you need to accomplish.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say make sure that it's like you figure out what are the elements you're going to want to build the kind of music you want to play, and then go from there. And that really determines like which gear you use, and you know, there's so many things that do the same thing.
Yeah.
So like for example, I don't do really well with Roland workflow because there's a lot of menu diving, you know, unless it's like, you know, stuff like the SH101 where it's like on the face of it. But with things like the MC707 or even, you know, the TR8, a lot of people use that for live because they like the faders and they like the control. But for me, I change sound design a lot in my, even in my drum elements during performance. And to do that on a Roland machine, you have to go into menus, change one thing, go to another menu, change one thing. So it's not quick enough for me live. But if I was going to set my drums and have them never change, and then just wanted the control over effects and faders and stuff, the TR-8 would be great.
Yeah.
But it just doesn't gel with my particular performance style. But for some people, it's the perfect machine. So it's it's never the same for any two people.
No,
really.
I understand. No, it's amazing. And it reaffirms the fact that I need to get to like a minimum viable product of like test driving something to then realize what am I getting, where am I getting frustrated, or where do I want to expand my expression, my range of expression, etc. And indeed, the analog rhythm seems to be the core of it, plus some combination of modular gear. I really like the idea of the Oxy one, because one of the reasons I don't like it kind of turns me off, the idea of trying to trigger a sample within, like triggering samples chromatically within the analog rhythm. I know there's the possibility to do so, but the sequencer, I haven't managed to do it very easily anyway.
Yeah, it's one thing that the Electron sequencers don't do very well. I think the Octatrack is the only one that, well, actually, no, I take that back. The Digitech 2 now does it, but there's not a way to quantize to scale. So you can't, so with those instruments, with the Octatrack and the Digitech 2, you can hold an individual note and then change the note and have it only give you the notes within the scale. So like that's the version of it, but you still have to do it one note at a time.
Yeah.
So it's still a little clunky, where you saw with the Oxy, it's like one press and I've got a new melody and here we go. I did my thing, now I can go back to sound design, which is the fun part for me, you know?
Exactly.
So.
Super interesting. Wow. And have you ever been, well, probably, but have you ever been in a situation where you are kind of like at the, like in Karen or in Store, like in dialogue with other people live creating on the spot, or is it always you as a solo show?
I've tended to play mostly by myself, although I have done a couple times where I've played with other people. Alex is actually one of them. We played a show here locally in Denver a couple years ago, and I played solo, then he played solo afterwards, and then as a closing, where the idea was to play together for like the last 30 minutes of the show to just kind of jam. And I was like, cool. So I went up when he was finishing and it was just about our time. And he was like, he tells me on stage, he goes, the MIDI cable that I have isn't long enough to get to your rig to sync us together. And I was like, okay, so what do I do? Well, interesting, at that time, my central kind of clock that was clocking everything, now it's the Oxy One, but before it was the Octatrack, and the Octatrack has a tempo nudge in it.
Yeah.
So I was
like
able to beat match to his live rig, and so we were still able to play together. But it was weird. It was like one of those things, like that's the other thing that people ask all the time, like, what if this goes wrong? What if this goes wrong? And that's the thing. Something always goes wrong.
Yeah.
So just being ready for, okay, if it goes wrong, you just adapt. You switch to a different thing. You change the cable, or you go to a different machine, or whatever it is.
I mean, to be honest, I've found even in the studio, like synchronizing things like mechanically often is such a head wreck that I don't mind when I know how to, especially if I have like an exact quantized BPM on something, on a sequencer or something, or arpeggiator or whatever, to just nudge it into the rhythmical pocket where I need it to be, and then just leave it there as long as its internal BPM is stable, and you know that everything is at a stable BPM. I know as a DJ how to like use my ears to get things to where they need to be. So that's really nice. But I was using this IntelliGel Metropolis as a sequencer for a long time, and it would drift out of sync with Ableton, and that just drove me fucking crazy. Because it's like there's no excuse. Like I think it's because I got really nerdy about it. It was really about like they didn't use interrupts, and so whenever it was using CPU to like count the time, the CPU couldn't keep up, and so the time would lag. And I was just like, guys, this is inexcusable for something that's supposed to be like the digital brain of a system.
Yeah, syncing with Ableton can be a challenge. I mean, it's fortunately Ableton has a lot of good tools for syncing things, but like if you look in like my template that I use when I produce, it's like you'll see like the different clock values of all my gear because everything is so bizarrely different from one another.
Right, yeah.
Just the amount of lag that certain things have and other things are like dead on, and yeah, it's crazy. The good thing with, if you don't use a computer in your performance when you play live, it's way easier to mechanically sync things than it is when you add a computer into the mix. When you have that kind of digital sync, it becomes very difficult. But with this, it's super easy. Everything's clocked from the Oxy.
Yeah.
I have CV clock going from the Oxy direct into the modular, and then that's clocking things within there. And then MIDI clock is going to the Digitact and the black box.
Yeah, perfect.
And it's all perfect because it's all coming from one source, right?
Yeah.
Every different format is coming from the same source.
Yeah.
So you don't have to like MIDI to this, then CV from there to the next thing, because then it just becomes a disaster.
Yeah. But so once you got the Oxy lined up, like for example, if we'd be trying to match up our systems and we both did like a 4 to the floor kick drum, and we just set it both to 140 BPM or whatever, and we got our kick drums to sit tight, from that point onwards you can kind of just jam it out.
I mean it's even easier than that. I mean, just it's a single cable between the rigs. So like my Oxy is clocking my whole setup, but it also has MIDI in. So if you sent me a MIDI clock to my in, your clock is now controlling my whole rig.
Yeah.
And it's all in sync. And because it's mechanically synced, like that physical DIN MIDI cable or TRS MIDI cable, it's way, way, way better.
Good to know. Yeah. That's good advice too. Man, Eric, thanks so much for this, for everything you've already shared with me. You've given me a lot of territory to explore. If I can send people to your world, how do I best phrase this? So anyone who wants to see more of Eric's, maybe you can share one.
Yeah, I mean, anybody that wants to see more, I have a YouTube channel, which is Surco as well, Surco. And then I also have the courses that I teach. So if you go to surcolive.com/courses, I teach a course in improvised live performance. So like in specifically what we're talking about here. And it's a really interesting program, if I can just mention it just for a sec, just because it's kind of done in a different way. So I wanted it to be not dependent on the way people learn, like, because everybody learns in a really different way. So there's a video portion of it, which people can watch whenever they want. It's like 50 videos that are, I can't even remember how many hours of video it is. And they can watch that whenever they want. And then during the 1 month cohort of the course, there's, those 50 videos are broken down into 8 sections. And there's 8 group calls during that month, twice a week, where we do it over Zoom with everybody that's in the cohort. People can ask questions. It's this same format, so that's why I have my camera set up like this. So if they ask a question, I can show them and we can go deeper into that thing. Everybody kind of learns from everyone else's questions, which is really cool too, because they might not think to ask something and somebody else does, and they get something really valuable out of that. And then those are all recorded, so if you can't make those, you could actually go back and watch them whenever you want. So you don't have to be there, but if you are, you get much more individual. Then there's also a 1 hour one-on-one with me during the month as well. So if you want to walk through MIDI settings, if you want to show me your live set, like anything you want to do. And then the last 2 parts are each week, the students submit up to a 10-minute video of them playing live, and I give them feedback via email. So about mixing, sound selection, flow, performance, all that kind of stuff. And then the last part is there's a private community of people that, it's kind of like a private Facebook group, but it's through the software that I use to host the course. And so people, every time there's a new cohort, everybody gets added to the group. And so there's always kind of new people coming in. They're meeting up in real life. They're like, oh, I'm in the next town over from you. Let's put together a live show. So it's become really super cool, and it just gets better each time that people add to it. So it's a real comprehensive thing. And so like, no matter the way you learn, if you just want to watch videos on your own, can do that too. If you really want the live stuff, you can do that too. And one-on-one, that's included. So it's kind of every way you could possibly learn is included in the course.
That's incredible, man. That's incredible. I might end up following the course. I'll
Anytime. It'd be awesome to have you there.
yeah. That's amazing. Okay, cool. Well, so you heard it here first. Go sign up, go follow Eric's stuff, and I hope to continue to develop this journey here on the channel with everybody. Eric, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, and always happy to answer any other questions you have. So just let me know.
Awesome, man. Leave any questions that you might have for Eric in the comments below. Go to his channel. Make sure to subscribe to his channel. You know that channels in this space can definitely use a boost in the algorithm. And yeah, cool. See you in future videos.
Yeah.
Nice.
Cool. Play with it.
Exactly.
You know, I'm big on, you know, and this again goes back to the mentality of improvising, but even with my students, with production, I'm huge on exploration and playing to make stuff. I'm not the kind of artist who I have an idea and I sit down and I produce that idea. I get inspired by the gear or the software or the plugin or the effect or whatever I'm using. I'm like, oh, that's cool. I want to play around with that. And then I'll find something I'll like and then I'll build on that.
Yeah.
And so I always encourage people to explore and experiment. And you know, I had one student in my course, and I teased him all the time because he was German and his workflow was very German.
Yeah.
Like he had this modular rig that was just perfectly, meticulously cabled, everything, but he was afraid to change anything. And his issue coming into the course was, I feel like I'm stuck.
Right.
I'm like, well, you're stuck because you're not ever changing anything. I was like, I said, this is going to cause you anxiety, but you need to unpatch your whole modular and patch it in a different way.
Whoa.
And then start playing with stuff. Because if you don't do that every once in a while, you get bored and you're just always making the same thing. It's always the same stuff. And then you're like, oh, I need to buy another piece of gear. It's like, no, you just need to use what you have in a different way.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, like these whole new worlds open up and, you know, you get inspired.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think
or you need to go to store and get inspired.
Yeah.
That works too.
Indeed. No, it is a bit weird that it's something that's so simple in a way, is like creating a space for play for yourself. Seems almost too obvious to mention, but it's like, it's actually not so obvious if you're not taught that perspective when you're a young creator. Because I feel like you kind of, at least I kind of grew up with this idea of like, you learn knowledge at school on how to do the thing, and then you execute by doing the thing, and your emotions are at best a distraction. Like you should not pay too much attention to your emotions, because that's the soft, weak tissue thing that's going to make the project fail.
That's very much the school mentality. Yeah. That's probably kind of a lot of what's wrong with our schools, you know?
Yeah.
I'm more like the Montessori system, where it's like, teach the kids to explore.
Exactly.
Teach the kids to play with
stuff. Let them try something and then see what emotions they have, and then deal with those emotions and see if they want to do more of that. Like that's kind of, But,
yeah, exactly. And that translates into my performances and my production, all that stuff, because that's kind of the mentality that I like, is that, you know, I tell my students sometimes, when you, they'll get a new piece of gear and they immediately try to integrate it into their setup. Or like in the DAW version is, you get a new plugin and you instantly want to try to use it in all your stuff. And I always tell them, you know what? Focus on that piece of gear by itself for a whole session or two. You know, maybe you've got a kind of a kick drum going for tempo, but if you get a new synth, like play with it, find its limits, figure out how far you can press it, and then you'll know what you have and know if you really need another thing to pick up the slack. Or maybe it already does what you want it to do, but you never pushed it. Like you never explored the limits of it. So you think you need more gear, or you think you need another plugin, or you think you need, you know, whatever, because you haven't fully explored what you have. Like that exploration thing, I think, is just so important.
I love just the phrase, know what you have. It's such a could be like a title of an EP or something. It's like very beautiful little sentence.
Exactly.
Rick, I'm going to make some food. I'm going to go make some food, have some dinner.
Sounds good.
Cool.
Awesome.
All right.
Well, thanks. And I hope to talk to you again soon.
Ciao, Rick.
We'll see you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.